Hey there, film fanatics and fellow sufferers of cinematic choices. Sometimes a movie isn't just bad. Sometimes it's so spectacularly awful, it transcends mere badness and becomes legendary. And when we talk about legendary takedowns, there's one name that rises above all others: Roger Ebert. When Roger Ebert, the titan of film criticism, declared a movie one of the worst ever made, it wasn't just a critique, it was a cinematic obituary. A declaration that, for him, this film had utterly failed its sacred duty to entertain, to enlighten, or even just to exist without causing physical pain. In this video, we're diving headfirst into that abyss, exploring 15 films that pushed Roger Ebert to his absolute limit. So buckle up, grab your popcorn, and prepare to cringe with me. First up, we have 1994's North. Now imagine a movie where a brilliant young boy, feeling unappreciated, gets legal permission to divorce his parents and travel the world auditioning new ones. Sounds quirky, right? Maybe a little whimsical? Well, to Roger Ebert, North wasn't quirky. It was a disaster of utterly colossal proportions. He famously, or should I say infamously, ended his review with these immortal words: "I hated this movie. Hated this movie." He wasn't exaggerating, folks, not one bit. Directed by Rob Reiner, the same genius who gave us The Princess Bride, this clumsy satire felt cruel, tone-deaf, and just painfully unfunny. Ebert believed its heartless premise undermined anything resembling charm. The film drags us through North's bizarre travelogue riddled with cultural stereotypes, shallow caricatures, and unearned sentimentality. There's a stop in Texas with cowboys, a musical number in an Amish town. I mean, it's like the film actively tried to offend every possible demographic with its lazy writing and misguided jokes. Ebert's anger really stemmed from the sheer waste of talent. With stars like Bruce Willis, Elijah Wood, and Jason Alexander, this could have been something whimsical. Instead, it felt like it insulted its audience, especially children, whom it tried to manipulate emotionally without earning their empathy. Its surreal logic and smug tone just made it feel like a bad Saturday morning cartoon stretched into 90 minutes of pure awkwardness. For Ebert, North was the ultimate betrayal of a good idea by terrible execution. His takedown became legendary, not just for the scathing language, but for how passionately he stood up for quality cinema against laziness masquerading as family entertainment. Next on our list is Vincent Gallo's The Brown Bunny from 2003. This film premiered at Cannes and was met with, well, let's just say a very enthusiastic chorus of boos, walkouts, and a legendary feud with Roger Ebert himself. Ebert called it the worst film in the festival's history. At its core, it's a slow, meandering road movie with minimal dialogue, grainy visuals, and a highly controversial final scene. Gallo plays a lonely motorcyclist drifting across America, haunted by memories of a lost love. But instead of introspection, Ebert saw it as self-indulgent misery. He famously compared watching the film to being trapped in a car with a narcissist who won't stop talking about himself. It wasn't just slow, it was punishing. Endless shots of highways, motel rooms, and gas stations just drained the film of any semblance of life. And when the ending finally came, a shocking, graphic scene with Chloe Sevigny, many critics, including Ebert, found it manipulative and exploitative. He believed it tried to shock its way into meaning. The feud, oh, the feud. It escalated when Gallo attacked Ebert's weight. And Ebert's response? He famously retorted, "It is true that I'm fat, but one day I will be thin, and he will still be the director of The Brown Bunny." That clapback became one of the most iconic moments in film criticism history. But beyond the drama, Ebert's criticism was grounded in deep disappointment over wasted cinematic potential. Ironically, Gallo later re-edited the film, trimming 26 minutes. Ebert later said the new version was better, but for Ebert, The Brown Bunny wasn't just bad, it was a warning about unchecked ego and the myth that artistic freedom alone justifies anything on screen. If The Brown Bunny was indulgent, then Freddy Got Fingered from 2001 was anarchic chaos on steroids. Directed by and starring Tom Green, this film didn't just push boundaries, it bulldozed them in all the wrong directions. Ebert gave it 0 stars, calling it a vomitorium of tastelessness. And folks, he wasn't wrong.
From swinging a newborn by the umbilical cord to absurd scenes involving animals and body fluids, the film seemed determined to how far gross-out comedy could possibly go. Green plays a failed animator who lives with his parents and torments everyone around him. There's no real plot, just a barrage of disgusting gags, random screaming, and aggressive stupidity. It became infamous for scenes like Green playing a keyboard while wearing deer carcasses. Ebert didn't just dislike the movie, he was genuinely disturbed by its existence and what it said about comedy trends at the time. The film was marketed as outrageous, but for Ebert, it crossed the line between daring and destructive. He argued that it celebrated humiliation, idiocy, and cruelty without an ounce of wit. While a few critics later tried to label it anti-comedy or misunderstood satire, Ebert firmly rejected that view. To him, it was simply an abomination. Despite its reception, Freddy Got Fingered developed a small cult following, mostly from those who admired its shock value. But for Roger Ebert, it was a cinematic endurance test that failed every measure of storytelling, character, and purpose. It wasn't just a bad film, it was an assault on the medium itself.
Ah, Michael Bay. Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen from 2009 was box office gold, but it was pure critical poison. Roger Ebert gave this sequel a blistering review, saying it represented everything wrong with modern blockbuster filmmaking. He described it as a horrible experience of unbearable length, criticizing its incoherent action, juvenile humor, and soulless spectacle. For Ebert, this wasn't cinema. It was just noise. The plot, if you could even call it that, follows the Autobots and Decepticons battling again while Sam experiences visions from touching a shard of the Allspark. What followed was over 2 hours of CGI mayhem, crude jokes, and scenes edited so fast they defied human comprehension. Ebert called it a movie without a brain. He especially condemned the racial stereotypes in the twin Autobots Skids and Mudflap, who spoke in exaggerated slang and illiteracy. Ebert felt these characters were offensive, lazy, and symbolic of the film's thoughtless approach to storytelling. Instead of building on the first movie's potential, the sequel just doubled down on explosions and abandoned logic entirely. Ebert's scorn came from the idea that such a film could cost $200 million and still feel so utterly meaningless. He warned that if this was the future of cinema, storytelling itself might become obsolete. Transformers: Revenge of the Fallen wasn't just a bad sequel, it was, to Ebert, a death knell for quality in big-budget filmmaking.
What happens when a global pop sensation tries to leap onto the big screen without a script, a plan, or any sense of irony? The Spice Girls were a cultural phenomenon, truly, but their movie was a cinematic train wreck. Roger Ebert awarded it 1 star, calling it an entertainment-free dead zone. The film attempts a parody tone, blending surrealism, backstage antics, and random cameos, but it ends up as a chaotic mess. It tried to be a Hard Day's Night for the 90s, but Ebert argued it had none of the Beatles' charm or wit. Instead, it was a shallow, overproduced commercial for girl power without any real substance. The jokes fell flat, the editing was jarring, and the characters were so thin they barely register as human. Even the musical numbers felt phoned in. Despite the film's obvious intention to have fun, Ebert believed it was cynical, made purely for merchandising, not for the fans. The Spice Girls definitely had charisma, but the script gave them absolutely nothing to work with. Scenes often felt improvised without structure, leading to a disjointed viewing experience that even die-hard fans struggled to defend. Spice World made money, sure, but at what cost? For Ebert, it was a reflection of how pop culture could be cannibalized into an empty product. The film wasn't just bad, it was a missed opportunity to showcase the Spice Girls' unique energy in a meaningful or even a mildly coherent way.
All right, folks, next up we have one for the record books, Ballistic X vs. Sever from 2002. This is one of the rare movies to earn a perfect 0% on Rotten Tomatoes, and Roger Ebert understood exactly why. He called it an ungodly mess and a masterclass in how not to make an action movie. Despite starring Antonio Banderas and Lucy Liu, this film was a catastrophe of editing, plotting, and character development. The explosions were non-stop. The plot was non-existent. The only real question was, who approved this? On paper, it's a spy versus spy thriller, but truly nothing makes sense. Characters switch sides for no reason, entire subplots go nowhere, and the dialogue? It sounds like it was ripped from a malfunctioning AI.
Ebert criticized it for being loud, boring, and utterly insulting to the intelligence of the audience. Despite its high-octane ambition, it somehow managed to feel slow and repetitive. The action sequences, meant to be the film's saving grace, were disorienting and overcut to the point of visual white noise. Ebert noted that the film assumed if things blew up often enough, people wouldn't notice how little was actually happening. But viewers did notice, and they didn't forgive it. Ebert's biggest frustration was the sheer waste of talent. Liu and Banderas deserved better. The film had the budget, the cast, and the premise for a decent popcorn flick, but it collapsed under the weight of lazy filmmaking and a script that might as well have been scribbled on a napkin. For Ebert, it wasn't just bad, it was so aggressively incompetent it felt like an insult to the genre itself.
Mike Myers. He was once the king of comedy with Wayne's World and Austin Powers. But then came The Love Guru in 2008, a film Ebert called painfully unfunny and offensive. The jokes were juvenile, the stereotypes were exhausting, and the plot was paper-thin. Myers played Guru Pitka, a self-help expert who spouted sexual puns and faux Eastern wisdom. It was meant to be irreverent. Instead, it was just embarrassing. Ebert's review absolutely ripped the film for being tone-deaf and culturally clueless. It relied heavily on mocking Indian spirituality, turning traditions into punchlines for cheap gags. While satire can be sharp and insightful, The Love Guru opted for lazy toilet humor and accents as punchlines. It wasn't brave, it was just tired. He also pointed out how the film reduced nearly every character to a stereotype. Justin Timberlake's character, a rival hockey player with an exaggerated accent and a massive ego, was symbolic of the movie's reliance on body part humor and not much else. Rom-com elements felt forced, and any attempt at heart was drowned under layers of cringe. Ebert was genuinely sad watching The Love Guru, not just because it failed, but because it showed a comedic genius fumbling in his own shadow. The film tanked at the box office, won several Razzies, and practically ended Myers' career for years. To Ebert, it wasn't just one of the worst, it was one of the most disappointing.
All right, prepare yourselves. The idea of Jason Voorhees in space. It should have been a parody, right? Not an actual installment in the Friday the 13th franchise. But Jason acts committed to the bet, and Ebert was not impressed. He found the film so absurdly stupid that it wasn't scary, funny, or even remotely interesting. In his review, he actually said, "This movie is so bad, it doesn't deserve a review. It deserves to be buried in a capsule and shot into space." Set centuries in the future, Jason is cryogenically frozen, thawed on a spaceship, and begins slaughtering crew members. It sounds like a sci-fi spoof, but the film plays it mostly straight. The effects were cheap, the acting worse, and the dialogue read like rejected fan fiction. Even the kills, which should have been creative in Zero Gravity, felt uninspired. Ebert hated that Jason X had no self-awareness. He argued that if you're going to send a slasher villain into orbit, at least have the courtesy to go full camp. Instead, it took itself seriously just long enough to make the absurdity even more glaring. It was neither frightening nor funny, just frustrating. In the end, Ebert saw Jason X as a symbol of franchise fatigue. When studios stop innovating and just throw a character into space, you know the well is dry. Jason didn't need to go to space, he needed a script. And for Ebert, Jason X was proof that even horror icons could die, not by machete, but by mediocrity.
Tell the following story in a fast, fun, warm style as if you were talking to a group of people listening to Top Movies to Watch podcast. Note that all sentences in parentheses for clarification of how you should react. You must do exactly what I note, but not repeat all sentences in parentheses. If the original Deuce Bigalow was juvenile but harmless, its sequel, Deuce Bigalow, European Gigolo from 2005, was offensive, crude, and shockingly lazy. Roger Ebert gave this film a vicious review, calling it aggressively bad. He even took a rare step, publicly defending fellow critic Patrick Goldstein, whom Rob Schneider had insulted. Ebert's final jab? "Mr. Schneider, your movie sucks." Boom! The film follows Rob Schneider's bumbling male escort character through Europe, encountering bizarre clients and even worse dialogue. The jokes are offensive to nearly every group: women, LGBTQ+ individuals, Europeans, and frankly, anyone with a working brain. Ebert lambasted it as humor by stereotype and creativity by numbers. The plot, such as it is, involves a serial killer targeting male escorts and Deuce trying to solve the case, but the mystery is barely coherent and the comedy even less so. Ebert noted the film had no cleverness, no timing, and nothing new to offer, just recycled sex jokes and bad prosthetics. Every punchline felt like an inside joke between frat bros who hadn't matured past 1997. For Ebert, this film was a breaking point. Not just because it was bad, but because it lowered the bar for what Hollywood considered comedy. He saw it as a symptom of a deeper problem: studios greenlighting garbage because they thought audiences wouldn't care. And if Deuce Bigalow, European Gigolo, taught us anything, it's that Roger Ebert definitely cared.
Rarely did Roger Ebert express moral outrage so directly, but I Spit on Your Grave from 1978 crossed that line. He called it a vile bag of garbage and literally walked out of the screening in visible disgust. The film tells the story of a woman who's brutally assaulted and later takes violent revenge. While some hailed it as a feminist revenge fantasy, Ebert saw it as exploitative, manipulative, and made with a disturbingly voyeuristic lens. The problem wasn't the concept of revenge, it was the way the film lingered on the assault with long, agonizing scenes that felt more like torture porn than social commentary. Ebert believed it wasn't condemning violence, it was enjoying it. He said it reduces women to helpless victims and men to sadistic animals. The movie was banned in multiple countries and sparked intense debate about censorship, gender violence, and exploitation in film. But Ebert was clear, this wasn't about art, it was about appetite. He called out the director, Meyer Zarki, for claiming it was based on a real story, arguing that authenticity didn't excuse the grotesque way it was portrayed. For Ebert, I Spit on Your Grave wasn't just one of the worst films, it was one of the most dangerous. It blurred the line between catharsis and cruelty, and in doing so, lost its soul. His condemnation wasn't just about taste, it was about ethics. To him, this was cinema at its most morally bankrupt. Ebert didn't just dislike Little Indian Big City from 1994, he loathed it. In fact, he called it the worst film I've ever seen in a theater. That's a staggering statement considering how many films he reviewed. This French comedy about a Parisian businessman who discovers he has a son raised in the Amazon jungle became infamous for its absolutely awful US dubbed version. Ebert's disdain stemmed from how obnoxiously shrill and embarrassingly unfunny the film turned out to be. What might have been a harmless fish-out-of-water story quickly devolves into a screeching, incoherent mess. The voice dubbing is a nightmare, high-pitched, over-the-top, and completely disconnected from the actors' performances. The film's jokes, mostly involving farting, clumsiness, and animal misunderstandings, landed with a resounding thud. The real tragedy? The original French version, Un Indien dans la Ville, had at least modest charm, but the American release was butchered beyond recognition. Ebert was furious that such a film was even released theatrically in the US, warning audiences it wasn't just bad, it was an insult to their time and money. For Ebert, Little Indian Big City symbolized Hollywood's disregard for quality when localizing foreign films. He didn't see it as a French flop, but as an American embarrassment, marketed to families without a trace of dignity. If you needed proof that bad dubbing could kill a movie, this was Exhibit A.
Based on a Michael Crichton novel and riding the wave of Jurassic Park's success, Congo from 1995 should have been a hit. Roger Ebert gave it 1.5 stars, stunned by how a movie with killer gorillas, laser guns, and ancient ruins could be so boring. He called it a spectacularly goofy adventure film with talking apes and nothing interesting to say. The story involves a team venturing into the African jungle in search of diamonds and lost technology. Along the way, they encounter volcanoes, warring tribes, and genetically enhanced killer apes. Sounds thrilling, right? Not quite. Ebert found it painfully slow, with wooden performances, clunky dialogue, and a robotic gorilla named Amy, who stole every scene for all the wrong reasons. Amy, the gorilla, with her electronic voice and Sesame Street hand gestures, became the film's unintentional mascot of absurdity. Ebert noted that the creature effects, which should have been the film's highlight, felt laughably cheap. Instead of suspense or awe, viewers got an awkward mix of sci-fi cliches and a National Geographic knockoff. For Ebert, Congo was a prime example of Hollywood mistaking spectacle for substance. It had explosions and monsters, but no real emotion, tension, or coherence. The film didn't know if it wanted to be campy or serious, and so it failed at both. Ebert's verdict? A jungle adventure without the thrill or the pulse.
This Paris Hilton rom-com wasn't just bad, it became a pop culture punching bag. The Hottie and the Naughty from 2008. Roger Ebert refused to review it himself, but his site gave it half a star, and he often cited it as a poster child for movies that should simply never exist. Starring Hilton as the unattainable beauty and Christine Lakin as the naughty and exaggeratedly unattractive friend. The film was shallow, mean-spirited, and astonishingly tone-deaf. The premise revolves around a man trying to date Hilton's character, but he's forced to first find a suitor for her ugly best friend. The jokes, oh, the jokes, they come at the expense of Lakin's character, who's depicted as repulsive due to warts, bad teeth, and thick glasses until a makeover magically makes her worthy. Ebert viewed this kind of messaging as toxic. Beyond its offensive beauty standards, the film was poorly written, directed like a cheap sitcom, and delivered with zero chemistry between actors. Hilton's performance was widely panned for being stiff and expressionless. The humor, mostly involving body shaming and gross-out gags, wasn't just unfunny, it was downright cruel. Ebert's outrage centered on what this film said about audiences. He saw it as a cynical, low-effort attempt to cash in on celebrity rather than tell a story. The film flopped hard, both critically and commercially. For Ebert, it was a warning sign. If we kept rewarding films like this, the entire genre of romantic comedy was in danger of extinction.
Few films made Roger Ebert angrier than Mad Dog Time from 1996. He opened his review by writing, "Watching this movie is like waiting for the bus in a city where you're not sure they have a bus system." That line set the tone, didn't it? This gangster film, meant to be slick and stylish, was so baffling, slow, and self-indulgent, Ebert gave it 0 stars. Directed by Larry Bishop and starring big names like Richard Dreyfuss, Jeff Goldblum, and Ellen Barkin, Mad Dog Time wanted to be Tarantino-esque cool. But instead of wit and tension, viewers got endless monologues, disconnected scenes, and no real plot. It felt like watching improv theater, with actors trying to out-weird each other. Ebert was furious that so much talent was wasted on what he called pointless stylization. Characters entered rooms, stared blankly, and exchanged dialogue that sounded like rejected jazz poetry. It wasn't suspenseful, it wasn't dramatic, it was just confusing, and not in a good way. The film seemed to exist purely for the director's amusement. Ebert ended his review by saying it was the first film he'd seen that didn't improve with the projectionist turning off the sound, then the picture. Mad Dog Time wasn't just a failure. It was a vacuum of joy, narrative, and meaning. For Ebert, it represented everything wrong with filmmakers who confused style for substance.
And finally, we arrive at the infamous Caligula from 1979. This film is legendary for being both a historical epic and an X-rated mess. Produced by Penthouse founder Bob Guccione and starring talents like Helen Mirren, Malcolm McDowell, and Peter O'Toole, the film promised grandeur. Instead, it delivered a grotesque blend of soft-core pornography and incoherent plotting. Roger Ebert walked out of it. Literally. He hated it so much he left the theater mid-screening. Ebert called Caligula sickening, utterly worthless, and shameful trash. He was appalled not only by its explicit content, but by how aimless and joyless the entire project felt. It wasn't just a misfire, it was exploitation dressed up as art. The sex scenes were graphic and critically inserted after filming, without the knowledge of several cast members. The production was chaotic, with the director, Tinto Brass, disowning the final cut, and the producers stuffing the film with graphic content to shock rather than tell a story. Ebert saw it as a betrayal of both the cast and the audience, a film that used history and talent as a Trojan horse for sleaze.
To Ebert, Caligula was the worst kind of cinema, a film with pretensions of art drenched in filth, offering no insight into history, humanity, or even eroticism. It was, in his eyes, pure cinematic poison. Not just bad, but corrupt.
So there you have it. 15 films that drove Roger Ebert to the brink. Some were loud, some were lazy, and some were morally outrageous. But all of them shared one thing. They broke the sacred pact between filmmakers and audiences. Ebert wasn't just reviewing movies. He was defending the soul of cinema. If you enjoyed this deep dive into these cinematic disasters, hit that like button, subscribe for more content, and let us know in the comments, which film do you think deserves the title of worst movie ever made?